Hello, everyone. I'd like to tell you the story of Bleeding, Kansas. But first, let me tell you of the first person that I want to talk to you concerning Bleeding, Kansas. And that is the man sitting next to us. His name is John Brown. He's most famously known for trying to raid a federal armory in Virginia to start a slave rebellion. He was eventually captured by United States forces that were led by Robert E. Lee. And then he was tried and executed. But that had nothing to do with Bleeding, Kansas. You see, prior to John going to Kansas, he lived in New York at a place called Timbuktu. Him and several other abolitionists, including Gerrit Smith and some other people, they put together and bought all this land for emancipated slaves to come build their houses, farm their land, live a real life on. And John and the other abolitionists, they had formed a group called the Gideonites. And the Gideonites were black and white folks, black and white Christians. All right. And after they set up the Timbuktu, they lived a nice peaceful life for a little bit. And then John's sons sent him a letter. It said, "Come quickly before we die and bring guns." So John and the Gideonites were off to Kansas. The Kansas got its name of Bleeding, Kansas because when Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, I think it was in 56, I'm not 54, 55. So when the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, it was to decide whether Kansas and Nebraska would be a free or slave state. So Nebraska was decided it would be a free state, and Kansas, they left up to popular sovereignty, which means the citizens in Kansas would determine if it would be a free state or a slave state. So with that being said, that started a border war with the citizens of Missouri, because Missouri was neutral, but they had slaves there. So a lot of Missourians wanting Kansas to become a slave state rushed into Kansas, along with people from Georgia, South Carolina. Everybody rushed to Kansas trying to make sure that it would be a slave state. But on the other side, we had people coming from New Hampshire. We had people coming from the North trying to make sure it would be a free state. This started a bloody battle. And during this battle, one of the central locations for the abolitionist headquarters was a place called Lawrence. And the Missourians sacked Lawrence and installed a pro-slavery government. So it was after that happened that John's sons sent him the letter, "Come quickly before we die, bring guns." John Brown and the Gideonites came to Kansas, and they settled down in a place called Osawatomie, which was like his relative's was where his relative's property was at. So after they settled down in Osawatomie, John Brown and his men, they began to uproot every pro-slaver that they could find having anything to do with the sacking of Lawrence, the passing of the pro-slavery laws, and the passing of fugitive slave laws. Because these people were going around, and when I tell you that in Bleeding, Kansas, there was laws that if you even helped a black man, you could be killed just for helping a black man. Do anything except being enslaved, you could be killed. So that's why his sons was calling him. So John and the Gideonites show up, and they go in to uprooting all the pro-slavery, all the pro-slavers, and the fugitive slave trappers. You know, and when I say uproot, I mean kill, dismember, or send them off with some extreme pain. John and his men were nothing nice. So anyway, John and his men finally caught up with the pro-slavery leaders, and they were at a place called Pottawatomie. And they got them to come out and surrender. And they took them down to a creek and hacked them to death. And I believe that they did it because it was the same thing that they ordered done to many of abolitionists, free staters, and freed slaves. They were all across Kansas just mercilessly killing people. And see, most of the times they had, most of free staters and abolitionists were outnumbered by the pro-slavers. So they kind of had their way until John Brown showed up. John went in on them and he cleared most of them out of Kansas. But then John ran into some problems with some other Missourians that came across the border in hunt of him. And it was like 400 against 50. And after putting up a good fight, being outnumbered 5-1, John fled from Osawatomie to Lawrence, and then he went back to New York. But in 1858, he returned back to Bleeding, Kansas, and he picked up right where he left off with his best friend in arms, James Henry Lane, which will be in the next video. So when you hear about John Brown, know that he is the hero of Bleeding, Kansas, at least one of them. Please stay tuned for my next video. I think I'm gonna do one on Henry Lane, and then I'm gonna go back to the first Kansas battles. So please keep an eye out for me.